The transfer portal may be closed, but the Utah Utes are not done adding talent.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network, and a huge shout out to our everydayers. My name is J.T. Wistrcill, credentialed media member who covers Utah athletics. On today's show, we'll be talking about Utah men's basketball getting their first Big 12 win of the year. Talk about Morgan Scalley making some big statements not too long ago. Also, got to talk about some big commits that Utah added. But first, want to tell you guys today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. As I mentioned in the open, the transfer portal, it's closed, but Utah, thankfully, not done adding talent. Let's call it what it is. Utah lost a lot in the transfer portal, and thankfully, they have stayed aggressive in continuing to try to add and improve this roster. One area they didn't lose anything to the transfer portal was receiver, but with their leading receiver graduating and their top 3 pass catchers moving on, and one of those actually being a transfer portal guy in J.J. Buchanan, who was kind of a wide receiver, right? Utah needed to upgrade their pass catching core, and they've been able to do that. And the latest addition from Chad Bumpus, who came over from Mississippi State to rejoin the Utah program after originally leaving for the same position at Mississippi State, his alma mater. He's now back with Morgan Scalley's group, and he has brought in a transfer portal wide receiver, as Utah has signed wide receiver transfer Ricky Johnson. The 6'2", 185-pound freshman only caught 3 passes this past season, but is a guy with the potential to be a really good player, I feel like. So I mentioned 6'2", 185, has been with Mississippi State for 2 years now, so been playing under Coach Bumpus for a couple of years, and he's a guy that knows what Coach Bumpus expects, wants out of his wide receivers, and is still very young, right? He's played in 17 career games, but he played in all 13 games last season. He only caught a handful of passes a season ago, as we mentioned, but he redshirted the year before, so 3 years of eligibility left. I see 6'2", I see 185. I see potential to be a really good player, because what did he do in high school? He finished his senior year with the second most receiving yards in his high school's history with 1,213 yards. He had 65 receptions and 16 touchdowns, averaging 18.7 yards per reception. And as a junior, he had 840 receiving yards too. So he's a guy who's put up a lot of stats at the high school level, and in a place like in Georgia, which we know how good Georgia is at high school football, easily one of the top 5 high school football states. So do I think this is Utah's #1 wide receiver next year? I'd say probably not, but I'll just say this. I like that Utah is bringing in a lot of wide receiver talent, because what are they doing? By continuing to bring in lots of talent. It's kind of like the NFL draft, or I guess the more common analogy used for this is the more darts you get to throw at the board, the more likely you are to hit. Whether it's Utah bringing a receiver from San Jose State, whether it's Utah bringing a receiver from Utah State. And Pagan obviously probably has the best chance to hit, seeing as he had over 800 yards with the Aggies last year, was a first-team All-Mountain West Conference guy. But then we get to Ricky Jones as well, too, right? He's a guy who was committed to an SEC school and has a strong pedigree, at least throughout his high school career. So you hope that maybe he could be a guy for this Utah team, because what are we talking about? Once again, throwing darts at the dartboard. We're hoping year 2 for Creed Whittemore, he does more. I liked what I saw in flashes from Creed Whittemore. I think he could be a guy. Haven't seen it over the course of a full season. Larry Simmons needs to do it over the course of a full season. And obviously Tobias Merriweather had a very underwhelming year, to say the least, honestly, for Utah football. So what is Utah doing? Bringing in a lot of wide receivers, and Darren Zipper is a guy I'm excited about his future. Missed last year with a season-ending injury. We don't know what he's going to be. There's not a lot of known commodities in the Utah pass-catching core. Talked about Noah Benny, their new tight end, yesterday. He had less than 300 yards at the FCS level. Is he ready to come over for a P4 schedule? Time will tell. I like that Utah is just bringing in as much talent as they can, and we'll see how these guys end up working out. So I do think this is a good get for Utah. I think he's got potential. I like that he's played for Coach Bumpus for a couple of years now, so he knows what to expect from his coach too, and can help some of the younger recruits and receivers coming in, especially some of the freshmen and sophomores that Utah has coming on who have to learn how to navigate and play for a new coach. He can help communicate to those guys, take them under his wing a little bit, and show them, hey, when he's saying this, whether it's Coach Bumpus is just getting on them or whatever, it's one of he can put his arm around those guys and be like, hey, this is what he's actually saying to you, and help them walk through and navigate that transition. So I like this addition for Utah. I have no idea if he's going to be one of their starting receivers, but he's a guy with a chance to be a good collegiate player, and that's all you can ask for. Utah also upgraded on the defensive side of the ball. Nicholas Igwe. I believe that's his last name. Apologies for the mispronunciation potentially. They did get a Kilgore College transfer. The 6'4", 255-pound defensive end comes over to the Utes after recording 2.5 sacks last year, 35 total tackles. So this is a guy who actually was a former Boise State signee, but Utah was able to bring him over. We mentioned Coach Enoch on yesterday's show and what he was been able to do with not just Pitt back in the day with helping Aaron Donald, helped Washington reach the national title even last year, trying to help that Baylor D-line, but he's a guy who's been around the block a long time, and now he's starting to add his own footprints and imprints, I should just say, to this defensive end room. Is this a guy who's going to be an instant impact guy for Utah? Probably not. If I had to predict, I'd say he's probably a year or two away from being a guy, but I just like that Utah is continuing to add to the defensive line because defensive line is very similar to wide receiver. Utah lost a lot. Utah has lost all 4 starting defensive linemen from a season ago, and they've lost their top 2 defensive ends. I actually think Utah replaces their guys that I can realistically project into being solid players, but I don't see John Henry Daly. I don't right now. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love if one of these guys became a double-digit sack guy and one of the top pass rushers in college football. Can't say I see that as we stand here today, but I really liked how Lance Holtzclaw and Cash Dillon looked in the bowl game. A reminder, Cash Dillon was actually third on this team in sacks with 3.5 sacks on the year. Lance Holtzclaw ended up with 1.5, but he was really impressive in the bowl game. And I'm still really curious about the potential of a Paul Fitzgerald. That was a guy who had 8.5 sacks a couple years ago with Utah State. Has not translated at Utah. He's been a backup for a couple of years now, but hopefully this upcoming season can be the year that he sees more success and is that third guy. I like at defensive end, I like to have 3 guys that can rotate in. If you get to 4, that's awesome. But a lot of times last year was a lot of John Henry Daly, Logan Fano, and then Cash Dillon. And I should say, Lance Holtzclaw did play a decent amount last year for Utah. So if you can get to 4, that's awesome. But at the very least, you really need 3 because with just the amount of reacting you have to do and just play in and play out what you're asked to do, hustling to the ball, making tackles, making stops, it takes a lot trying to wrestle a grown man to the ground. And obviously we know these college running backs, pass catchers, whatever it may be, they are grown men. So you need to have depth that you can swap in and out, especially defensive linemen. They're just going to wear down quicker. The offensive linemen, each play, they only have to move a couple of steps versus defensive linemen. They, in some plays, only have to move a few steps, but it takes a lot of effort to get around an offensive lineman. It takes more effort to get around one than it does being the guy to stand in front. Not saying that doesn't take effort, but you don't have to cover as much ground standing in front of you as you do if you're trying to bend and get around someone, right? So you need depth at defensive end. That's what this addition is for me with Utah. I don't think that Igwe, as I said, is going to be a first-year guy who just comes in and makes a monster impact with this Utah team, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's what Utah needs for him to be. I think they need him to be a guy that can be added depth for the future. I'd love it if by this time next year, we're heard throughout the season or off season, whatever it may be, how he's bought into the training regimen, the program, and he's just looking really good in the off-season workouts. And then next year, maybe he's a developmental guy. So I'll also just say this. Utah a couple years ago got Dallin Bentley from the junior college ranks, and it took a couple years, and he has emerged as last year as one of the top tight ends in the Big 12. It would be awesome if Igwe could eventually be that level of player. So time will tell with that. Of course, all these guys committing to play for Morgan Scalley. And Morgan Scalley, I am so fired up for his future with Utah Athletics, and I'm going to tell you why you should be too in one moment. This episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. There's nothing like the college football season, the tailgates, the packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that can be the hard part. That part used to be the most frustrating with long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout, right? But now you can save a lot of time and stress with Game Time because Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. I opened the Game Time app to look at upcoming games, and I was surprised at just how fast I was able to find great seats. I love being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I know exactly what type of a deal I was getting. How about the zone deals too? You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Seeing college football tickets starting as low as $25 is also a huge plus too. You can take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. If you guys want to join our Everydayer Club, now you can. You may be saying, what is the Everydayer Club? Well, it's an opportunity for you to, number one, get an ad-free version of this podcast, and it's an opportunity for you to join a Discord with myself and other Locked On hosts, whether it's Big 12 or whatever. You can hop on and join in on the discussion. We'll be doing Q&As on there, as well as you guys can send in questions for me that will be answered on this show. To learn more, check out lockedonutes.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club. A few weeks ago, Morgan Scalley had his press conference, and we were barely able to scratch the surface of all the great things he said, and just all we uncovered, whether if it was from Morgan Scalley or Mark Harlan, that I wanted to talk about some of those things, because I know Utah's been making a lot of moves in the transfer portal, but the biggest new thing and the biggest change to Utah next year still will be the man on the sideline. Yes, Morgan Scalley's been with Utah, so things won't be drastically different, but it is still a new voice, still a new man making those decisions, and he's the man that's going to guide this program to whatever heights the future for this team is going to be. So going back to Morgan's press conference last week, he was asked by, actually this will be Mark Harlan. Mark Harlan was asked by the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley, what he saw in Morgan Scalley to make him be the guy. And he said, he just saw, even you could just see it in the press conference, right? Because last time we talked about the press conference, we talked about how great of an opening statement Morgan Scalley made. Just, if you were a Morgan Scalley doubter, I can't imagine you remained one as long as you're being open to it. And because I know some people just listen to anything with their preconceived notions and bias that no matter what happens, they're just going to hate on it, right? That never happens, only in the comments of the show every single day. But Morgan Scalley, this is Mark Harlan talking about Morgan, said, you just saw it in his press conference, the passion. You know, they talked with Kyle for a long time, he said. Mark did, about Morgan, how he could just tell how much Morgan loved his players, how he just approached the game, the practice. He knew that he was the right guy for this job. And then Morgan came in and he talked about too, like him being calm under pressure. And that's where he talked more, and Morgan stepped in after Mark said, and he's also very calm on the sideline. And Morgan's like, well, I'm glad we don't have hot mics on the sideline, because that might not be the case, which was funny too. And Morgan was also asked as well, like, hey, why was this place you wanted to be? And he said he loves this place. And we talked about that last time, his comments about how much he loves Utah, being from here. He said he never wants to uproot his family. And he says, as long as he's valued here, you're not going to leave. He's grateful he's been here. And you can tell he wants to be here. He wants his legacy to be as a Utah man through and through. And just one day at a time, he wants to grow that legacy. He was asked, like, what are your goals for this program? And he said, I just want to take it one day at a time, which I'd be totally down if he went big picture. And he did say at one point, like, he wants Utah to be a place that can get to national championships, but he didn't walk in his press conference and say, like, that's what we're going to do. I think a lot of coaches get themselves in trouble when they walk out on the basketball court or wherever, and they just start talking about how much everyone sucks. Curt Cignetti at the time at Indiana, we thought he was doing that, right? He said, Purdue sucks, Ohio State sucks, Michigan sucks. Well, he was right about Purdue, but Ohio State and Michigan, well, Michigan obviously won the national championship 2 years ago, Ohio State last year. Now who's about to win the national championship, I believe, at the time I'm recording this? I think it's Indiana. Like, that's how good he is there. So, but you could just be dangerous when you're writing checks that are very hard to cash with your mouth. So he was asked about his offensive philosophy. He said he wants his offense to be physical. Believe that will never change. That's something he learned under Kyle. He said you have to establish an offense and defensive lineman too. You have to be strong in the trenches. He said last year Whit brought him in on the offensive coordinator search. And he said they looked at a couple of guys too. He loves, and one thing he really likes is how Morgan looked at is, what do the other coaches do, or what do these candidates do that if I was a defensive coordinator would stress me out? And he talked about one thing he loves are just shifts and motions. And obviously one thing that Morgan is big on as a defensive coordinator, and Utah had to change this a little bit throughout the years, Morgan, when he's sending in the play calls to Utah, he likes when the guys run up. He likes to see what an offense comes out in and then send in the signals. And guys have taken advantage of that from Morgan doing that. Other coaches have, and what they'll do is they'll motion their shift, and then Morgan has to try to change the play up to his guys. And what happens? The other team is already snapping the ball. So he talked about that's something that he always likes is when he doesn't like when they do it, but it irritates him when he does it. But he thinks it's very important for offenses to do that. So he wants his offense to do that. And that's what led him to Kevin McGiven. And he wants his team not just to be physical, but innovative. He said, when you turn on the tape, you just see all the issues his offense presents. And Morgan said, I watch a lot of football. I like to see what would cause my defense issues. He says every year on the road, his name comes up as a guy to watch. He creates issues at every level of the field and is efficient at what he does. He has done it without the resource. And that's true. He's done a lot of it at the P4 level. I will say it's not completely true, because as we talked about on the show, I haven't seen it get mentioned a lot. He was the offensive coordinator at Oregon State, and him and the rest of the staff that were there at the time, they were dismissed. They were like 1-11, I think, his last season, and they only scored above 30 points in one game against a P4 team. So it didn't go great the last time. Does that define him? And that's who he is? No, of course not. But as I've said before, I'm just a little skeptical. There's a reason I wasn't doing jumping jacks and backflips, especially emphasis on the backflips, and not just because I can't, but because I just don't see a proven track record of elite offensive coordinator year over year. A reminder, 2 years ago at San Jose State, when Ken took over, the former Air Force coach took over there, Kevin was reassigned to wide receiver and pass game coordinator. He was the offensive coordinator before, then got reassigned. Then after a year there, he went to Utah State to be their OC. Was a really good year there, but one good really year there to now running a P4 offense. That's a big leap considering you just 2 years ago got demoted. It's just a fact. That's what happened. Like, that's what going from offensive coordinator to pass game coordinator is. It is a demotion to then 1 year as a good OC at the G5 level, but not outstanding. Like, well, once again, Jason Beck, when he got the job, Utah was top 5 in yards per game in the country, or New Mexico was. This past season, the Aggies were in the 30s of scoring offense and yards per game too. So good, but not that upper echelon. So we'll see how that obviously all goes. But I do trust Morgan, and I do think Kevin's going to do a good job with this group. I just don't know if it'll be outstanding, but I hope to be proving wrong. You know, he was asked about when hiring his assistants, what he looks for, and he said he wants to grab guys from now that are down the road. He said it's a combination of guys that he had names in mind of who he wanted to bring in. And he said great teachers is a priority. That's something he looks for in assistants. He said 30 to 40% of the roster will change over the years. We know that right in the portal. So when new faces come in, you have to get them ready to go. And he looks for great men. And I do like his philosophy when hiring coaches. I think he's assembled a really strong staff overall, and I'm excited to see what this group can do. He did talk about too the what he wants in his wide receivers too. He likes guys that are able to line up and be told what they're doing in the moment. So players, you got to think fast, think quickly, and on their toes and act on their feet. So that's something that is curious, and I imagine that's what Coach Bumpus agrees on. And one of the reasons that he then brought in Ricky Jones is a guy who is able to do that for his team. He was asked about his approach to NIL. He said, hey, it all starts with culture. You need to be strong so that a high dollar figure does not sway your guys. You have to have a great culture and support. Make this place where players don't want to leave because they're getting the best. Morgan Scalley said a lot of great things throughout the press conference. This wasn't his best thing, but I totally agree when you're in the position that Utah is. And I know we got private equity coming, and we'll see how that deal all works when it clears, and maybe Utah will get to be an upper echelon NIL school. They're just clearly not. So that's why when he says you have to have a strong culture to beat the higher NIL dollar figure, he is 1 billion% right, because that's how Utah is going to have to, if they want to retain their best players, they're going to have to convince them with culture first, then a strong financial offer. Because more than likely, if it's a elite player or best of the best at his position, Utah's not going to be able to offer the highest. We've seen that a couple of years now, right? But if Utah can say we can get close to that, and we have this great culture, you like it here, you like your coaches, your friends are here, stay, then that's how you get guys to stay. So I love how Morgan is going to approach the portal. It does start with the culture. When you can't just give a guy any amount of money, it has to start with culture, and I love that. He asked about portal targets. He said we got to recruit our own guys, clarity and accountability. He said change can be tough for everyone, and fear has an impact on the mind. He says I just try to stay confident in the future, talking about how he's going to handle his transfer portal philosophy. And I really like that he wants to recruit the guys that fit Utah, because obviously Utah has been getting out recruited for a very long time in college football, right? This is a Utah team that there's a reason USC and Oregon were ahead of them in the recruiting rankings all those years. But yet Utah, because they found the right guys and the right coaches and the right people in places to make plays and beat the Trojans and Oregon Ducks. Utah wants to put themselves in a position where if they get in a big game against Oregon, if they get in a big game against the USC, whoever in the CFP, right, they can beat those teams once again. And that's where recruiting the right type of guys and not just falling in love with, oh, boom, 5-star here. That's where that really pays off. And I like that Morgan is keeping that same philosophy here too. And he was asked about building an identity. He said, look, similar to Kyle Whittingham, we're going to win with physicality. The flavor can be different, but identity is the same. Defensive players know me, and the offensive side is learning me. I love, this is what we talked about. Whenever you have an all-time great coach like Kyle Whittingham, you do not want to move on. Whenever you have a great coach like Kyle Whittingham, I'll put it this way. If you have a great successor in-house, you hire him. You don't move on from that successor to hire someone from the outside to come in and try to make it great like the last coach did. That's saying if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, Kyle leaving means that you're making a little bit of a change, but let's make as little of a change as we can when we have a dream candidate, a Utah man who wants to be here, who's one of the 10 best defensive coaches in the sport. That's what Utah did, and I love that he's going to keep that same culture and win with physicality. He asked how he feels it's gone so far in his first year. He said, it's my first birth, and I gave birth to twins. That's how he feels like this whole process is. No sleep, hair on fire. Assistant coaches is something like he's brought these guys in. They're barely getting talked about, but he's bringing them up to speed, and it's been a chaotic and wild cycle, and I have no doubt that that is the case, but I feel like he's done a good job managing it overall. I also love that he called Sharif Shaw his best friend. He talked about how a long time ago Utah had 2 5 and 7 years in a row, and Kalani left for BYU, and he also said he loves Kalani, and I love that. We can have the passion of the Utah-BYU rivalry while the coaches still loving on each other, supporting each other, and it's just, if you dislike BYU, which we all obviously have a dislike for them in general, just as a healthy one for the most part, some probably don't, but I have a healthy rivalry dislike for the Cougars. But I love Kalani Sitake. I think he's one of the best coaches in the sport. I think it would have been a home run hire had Penn State nabbed him, but BYU did the right thing and was able to keep him there. But that's why I love that Morgan said he loves Kalani, and I know Kalani absolutely feels the same way because obviously he's been effusive in his praise of Witt over the years and he used to work with Morgan, so I'm sure he feels the same way. But he was asked too about, like, hey, he was talking about his relationship with Sharif Shaw, and he said when Kalani left, we had no clue if they would be retained, but we just put on the film and went to work. And he said, thank heaven we were able to keep our jobs. And now today, Shaw is a new coach too. He's not the defensive coordinator, but he's like associate head coach, and he's earned that. He's one of the best defensive back coaches in the country. And Utah retaining him was a massive deal because I think he is one of the best at what he does. Just like I think Morgan Scalley is going to be one of the best, but we'll wait and see how that goes. We'll probably talk about the rest of the press conference at some point in the future, but we need to move on and talk about some Utah men's basketball because they did something I've been waiting to say for a couple weeks now. Finally got a Big 12 win. That's right. Utah men's basketball got a Big 12 win this past weekend. They were able to best the TCU Horned Frogs 82-79. Utah up by 8 in the first half, 38-30. Actually got outscored in the second half, but still wound up getting the win. What was big for Utah in this one was the three-point shooting. Utah made 9 threes compared to TCU's 4. And once again, it's Terrence Brown putting this team on his back, getting it done. Brown, 26 points in this one for Utah, 9 for 15, 4 or 5 from 3, 4 for 5 from the free throw line too. Brown, such a dynamic guard for this team. And, Traore chipping in with 11 as well. He's had an up and down season, to say the least. Keanu Dawes, a double-double, 10 points, 14 rebounds for him too. Don McHenry, 12 points for him, a little under what we're used to seeing from him, but still a guy that stepped up in some big moments. But either way, this was huge for Utah to be able to get this Big 12 win because TCU is another team that is not outstanding. TCU is, in fact, towards the bottom of the Big 12. They're 1-4 in Big 12 play. Utah now 1-4 in Big 12 play. And the Big 12 conference is an absolute gauntlet when it comes to college basketball. Wins are hard to come by. Obviously, Utah, just this past week, lost to a top 10 BYU and lost to a Texas Tech by 15. So now, or just by double figures, excuse me. Now this week, they'll have a chance to beat Kansas State. That'll be tough on the road, but the Wildcats have not been very good so far this season. Then you go to BYU again. And then later in the year, you still got to see top 10 ranked Houston, Iowa State. The Big 12's a gauntlet. It's the best college basketball conference this season. Big 12 wins are going to be hard to come by in year one for Alex Jensen. This team is already, barring a Big 12 tournament miraculous win, not going to make the NCAA tournament, but the fact that they're able to scrap, claw, and continuing to fight to find these Big 12 wins, to me, is encouraging. I've said it not too long ago. I don't think this team is going to finish very high in the Big 12. If they finish at the bottom, it wouldn't surprise me. It's not the most talented roster. I right now have them at 3 Big 12 wins. I could probably see them getting to 5 or 6. Anything more than that, I'd be shocked at, just based on how they've looked throughout the season. They don't have enough size to me. And I like Terrence Brown, Don McHenry, but they rely a lot on small guards, and there's a history of smaller guards not always succeeding at the highest level in the biggest games. It's happened. There's been outliers, but I'm just talking about the overall history. But credit Terrence Brown. He's having an outstanding season. In some ways, he's even proving that statement wrong I just said, but he can't do it all on his own. And we've seen that a couple times now be the issue for Utah, where the guards show up, but no one else does. This team needs to be more consistent. They have to rebound better, but they just don't have the size, and they're not consistent enough. And against the best teams, I think they're going to continue to struggle this year. I hope I'm wrong. I want to see Utah men's basketball be back and good. I still believe in Alex Jensen, and I think him and Wes Wilcox and the rest of the staff made some mistakes when acquiring talent in this cycle, but they've also had some hits, right? We talked about right there, where Don McHenry is part of it too, but especially Terrence Brown, 2 big hits. But there's been other hits. Ja'Kai Howard, a guy they got from Auburn, he hasn't played at all yet. And I'd love to say how awesome he's doing, but just a fact, he's not playing. And that was a former 5-star who was with the Tigers. And now he's not doing anything with this Utah team. And another guy, obviously Utah got Elijah Chopin Moore, and he ended up leaving the program, leaving the team. So we wish him best of luck in his next endeavor, but the plan that Utah had for him obviously didn't materialize. There's been misses with this Utah men's basketball roster, and hopefully these coaches, the GM, Wes Wilcox, will learn from it and build a stronger team moving forward. But still, got about a month and a half left of the season. I think Utah's season will end in mid-March, but we'll wait and see what happens. And either way, I'm still supporting Alex Jensen. I think we need to continue to show up and support him. And they'll get some wins in Big 12 play, a couple, but it's just a rough year one. So we'll see how it all goes and plays out from there. That is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Utes. A reminder, if you guys want to get an ad-free version of this episode, as well as join our Discord chat where we'll be doing Q&A as well as questions answered on this show, make sure you guys head over to the Locked On Utes YouTube description as well as podcast description, or just go to the link lockedonutes.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club. Thank you again for making this show your first listen and view of the day. If you're in the market for a second listen, you can check out Locked On Big 12 or Locked On College Football. That's going to do it for us here. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Talk about the latest in Utah athletics.